Hey, what's up guys? Today we have a bit of a different video. We're going to be talking about the most important things you should know to maximize your damage in Genshin Impact. There's going to be some advanced gameplay tips that I don't see people talking about too much. Things like snapshotting, quick swapping, maximizing your DPS in many different ways, notably with team building, managing your energy and your iframes, avoiding a lot of attacks, and optimizing your rotations. So there's a lot of things we're going to be talking about. I'll try to include timestamps on the time bar and in the description. And I'm going to be honest, this was a video that was very difficult for me to structure and title. I don't even know what the title is going to be because it's a lot of separate information, a lot of different things that you should know that could each be their own individual video, but that I'm all clumping up into this one to give you guys concise information, clear information to help you be better at Genshin Impact, to play it more efficiently. And I'm going to try to include tips for every type of player. And I want to keep this intro short. First of all, I want to clarify that the beginning of this video will be a bit more basic things like resource management and team building, but then we'll get into the more advanced stuff as the video progresses. With that being said, I stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested. I hope this video helps you. Let's get right into it. So when it comes to maximizing your damage in Genshin Impact, there's a lot of things we need to cover. The first thing we're going to talk about is actually your team itself, team building, different types of teams, rotations, and a lot of important things that you might be missing to optimize your damage. First of all, I'm going to cover the basics. A general team, as you guys probably know, the most common iteration of a team is running 1 DPS, a healer just to, heal you up when you take damage, and then running 2 supports to assist you. These supports usually help you proc specific reactions, like Electro Charge in this team, or Superconduct for Razor, which is very important to maximizing your damage. And actually optimizing your reactions is a big thing, but this is more basic knowledge, so I'm going to go through this kind of briefly. But let's say you're running a pyro character like Hu Tao or Diluc, making sure you run them with Vaporize or Melt, especially Vaporize because of how good Xingqiu is compared to like cryo supports, is just really, really strong. So running an optimal team comp definitely is essential to maximizing your damage. Now, these are things that you probably already knew, so let's get into a bit more advanced things. First of all, regarding resource management, I always recommend investing in your main DPS. And while there are different team formats like Quickswap Teams where every character plays a significant role, in these teams where it's like a hyper carry, right? Or just one character DPSing, investing in that character first is a very efficient way to maximize your damage without spending a lot of resources. And for example, in this team, my Xiao team, even if all my supports had no artifacts, I would still be able to just solo everything with Xiao as long as they're there supporting him with like Bennett's Burst and Zhongli's Shield and Venti as a battery. Now, I've covered resource management in other videos, so I'm not going to talk too much about it now, but something you should know is that you can get a lot of value from relatively low investment supports. For example, Bennett is insanely powerful, but all he needs is a leveled weapon with a high base attack and just enough energy recharge to be able to get your burst back on cooldown. So anywhere from 200 onwards, so 200 or more is usually what you're looking for. And then you can just level your burst talent, and that's about it. Your artifacts can be leveled, right? Having a plus 20 flower will help you with HP. Having an ER Sands is very important. But apart from that, like even if your feather is +0, the only thing you're losing out on is substats, because, the plume doesn't help your Bennett. And while Bennett is a unique case, a lot of other characters can run on relatively low investment until you have the resources to invest into them. For example, Xingqiu is a character who does insane amounts of damage. But even with no investment at all, just having enough energy recharge to spam your burst is enough to enable your carry like Hu Tao or Diluc to deal their maximum amount of damage without needing to invest in your Hydro support. However, as I mentioned, he does scale very well with investment, so it is something you should look for after your DPS is built. The next thing I want to cover is a very important part of every single team comp, and this concerns optimal rotations and snapshotting. So first of all, the order in which you use your characters, in which you swap into specific characters, use specific abilities, is very important and oftentimes overlooked. While some characters might not seem to care about this, for the most part, you generally want to make sure you're using your team comp optimally, whatever that team comp is. For many teams, it can be very straightforward. You use all your support characters' abilities and then you swap your DPS to just auto attack or whatever. But things can get more complicated, especially when you're using characters who snapshot and you want to ensure that you get all the buffs on that burst. So first of all, I want to explain what snapshotting is. Snapshotting is a property that specific abilities have, like Xiangling's Pyronado, like Beto's Burst, and like many other abilities in the game. And there isn't really an easy way to tell what snapshots. You mainly have to test it because some abilities that seem like they would snapshot, like Xingqiu's Burst, doesn't. And you might be wondering what snapshotting does. I've explained it in a few other videos, but just very briefly, it basically factors in the buffs that you give your character for the whole duration of the ability. What that means is, let's say you use Bennett's Burst, right? And then you use Xiangling's Burst. The burst will get buffed, right? Because she's in Bennett's ult, But even if you run out of it, even if Bennett's ult expires, your burst will still be buffed because it snapshots. It takes the buff and factors it in for the whole duration of the burst. It factors in whatever stats you had at the very beginning of your burst. That is why snapshotting is so broken, because it factors in buffs for the whole duration, so you don't need to like stay in Bennett's burst the whole time, and even if it expires, it doesn't matter. And so snapshotting is a very strong property that some abilities have. And so when you are using characters whose abilities can snapshot, it is very important that you have an optimal rotation to make sure you're doing the most damage, and I'll show you guys what I mean in a second, but this also applies to just general teams. Having a good rotation is key to literally any team comp. Let's say you're running Diluc as a main DPS or Hu Tao. You want to make sure you use Xingqiu's rain swords to apply hydro to everything you're attacking before you like use the burst on that character, before you start DPSing on your pyro DPS. So before you press E on Hu Tao and turn all your auto attacks into pyro, you want to make sure you have your rain swords up, which is a pretty straightforward example, but there's a lot more nuance that you might not take into account. For example, if you're running Sucrose on a Thrilling Tales, you always want to make sure you're swapping into your main DPS or whoever's dealing the most damage after your Sucrose. And now while you might take a lot of this for granted, or it might seem somewhat simple, in team comps like this one, where there's a lot of abilities you need to use in a specific order to maximize your damage, messing any of the rotations up will significantly decrease your damage, making it a quite difficult team comp to execute properly. So I'm going to show you guys what I mean. If I just pressed Shangling's Pyronado without thinking, and then Xingqiu's Burst just to spam Vaporize, my Vaporizes will only deal 17k. Even if I use Bennett's Burst, this won't affect it because it's snapshots, so it's still going to deal that 17k as you can see, which isn't nearly as much as I can deal with my Xiangling. So now I just reset the floor with the exact same artifacts on every single character, so nothing will change. And if I make sure to get everything perfectly, so I use Bennett's Burst, then I use Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers and Verdescent Venerer, go into Xiangling, snapshot it, and then apply Hydro, the damage I'm going to be dealing is 41k on every single hit. So as you can see, I like increased my damage like 2 or 3 times there, going from 17k to 41k on every single crit. And that rotation wasn't like perfect or anything, it was just to showcase an example, but basically like when you are buffing your character, especially if they snapshot, doing an optimal rotation, the damage you deal increases very, very significantly. The next thing we're going to talk about is actually Quickswap Teams. This is something I don't see getting a lot of attention or even coverage in like other videos. Not many people talk about Quickswap Teams, but they can be very strong, and so I want to cover what they are, how to play them, and their strengths and weaknesses. A Quickswap team is one where you don't really have an on-field DPS. You just have 4 characters that usually are all invested into, that are constantly swapping between each other using their skills and their bursts. The reason why this team works so well is because these characters usually have high scalings on their abilities, they synergize well together, and their abilities paired with one another's just do a lot of damage. As you can see from the footage in the background, this Quickswap team allows my cryo characters to reverse melt. Xiangling's Pyronado will be applying pyro and dealing good amount of damage, while the cryo characters reverse melt and deal even more damage. On top of that, in this specific team and in many other Quickswap teams, if you run characters of the same element, they can actually generate a lot of particles of that specific element for the whole team, allowing you to run on relatively low energy recharge. And even in general, since Quickswap teams spam their elemental skill basically on cooldown or close to it, you're generating a lot of particles, diminishing greatly the amount of energy recharge you actually need on every single character. And Quickswap teams as a whole are just very powerful and very nice if you have the resources to build it. That being said, there are a few downsides. Number one, you do need some specific units to play Quickswap teams. Not everyone is good in Quickswap, right? For example, Xiao doesn't really want a Quickswap team, whereas a character like Venti or Jean can do very well in them. On top of that, a pretty big downside is that you actually need a lot of investment. As you guys can see, you need to invest in basically every character in a Quickswap team, except sometimes like a healer like Bennett, who can run on low investment, but it can be expensive to build your Rosaria to deal damage, to build your Kaya to deal damage, and also Xiangling in this example team. That is 3 characters you have to invest into at a decent level, whereas let's say a hypercarry like Xiao or Eula will only need investment in them for the most part. That being said, I love Quickswap teams and I find them very fun, and they can be optimal in many situations depending on your teams. The next thing I want to talk about concerns energy management and properly, efficiently running characters with very low energy recharge or just enough to make it work. So as you guys know, I believe characters like Xiangling and Beidou are usually very, very underrated because people usually think they need much more energy recharge than they actually need. That is usually because people are playing the characters suboptimally, but if you know what you're doing and you play the character well with a battery, you can run very low energy recharge on characters like Beidou, Xiangling, or even Xiao, allowing you to have very cracked ratios to deal insane amounts of damage without needing a ton of energy recharge. So to show you guys what I mean and how little energy recharge you can get away with on many characters, I'm going to run a Beidou with 115 energy recharge, just to show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. Now keep in mind, you can and probably should run more than that energy recharge wise, just to be comfy in case you mess up or anything. But for a lot of characters, it can follow this pattern. If you are playing optimally, you don't necessarily need as much energy recharge as a lot of people will tell you. This applies for characters like Xiao, Xiangling, Eula, or Beidou. You basically run a battery of the same element and funnel particles into whichever, whoever your main DPS is, by being on field and catching the particles of the same element of your character. So I'm going to use Beidou as an example here, as I did in my last video, but she does represent a good example of a character whose energy problems are usually overrated. I use my skill into my burst to get the particles during the animation, and then after that, I'm just auto-attacking, collecting the particles from my battery Fischl and even Xingqiu, proccing Electrocharge. And then this whole time, I'm DPSing with very low energy recharge, which means I get to max out my crit stats. And as you can see, I will get my burst back on cooldown. I don't even need to get a perfect parry, I just press E. And now boom, I get my burst back as soon as it's up. And keep in mind that wasn't an optimal rotation. I know in my last video I got my burst back with like 6 seconds on cooldown with similar ER. And also this doesn't mean you need to run low energy recharge. It just means that you can, and that you don't need as much as a lot of people say you do on many characters. Similarly for characters like Xiao or Xiangling as a main DPS, and I just put them all on the same team here to show you guys, but basically like let's say you need, like you're trying to farm particles, you always make sure to use your battery's ability, in this case Venti, and then when the particles fly to you, you just swap to your DPS, whoever needs the particles, and then they will gain them. For Xiangling, you can do this while you're attacking, so like while you're applying like the rain swords that you would have, you can do this on Bennett, spam your E, and then I didn't really show it there, but you press E on Bennett, swap to Xiangling, and you can repeat that on cooldown because Bennett's E has a very low cooldown inside his burst. The next thing I want to talk about is something I notice a lot of more casual players struggling with, and this is how to properly use iframes. If you don't know what iframes are, it means invulnerability frames, so basically you're invulnerable for periods of time after doing specific things. The most obvious one is dashing. You have a lot of invulnerability when you dash. I'll let these guys attack me to show you what I mean. But basically, if you dash at the perfect time, as I'm sure you know, you can just not get hit, avoid damage, even if you would otherwise just normally get hit by that. So learning how to dash through enemies' attacks is something you should know, but that is something that I don't really need to tell you guys. What I'm here to say is, yes, you want to learn attack patterns and optimize when to dash, save your stamina, and dodge attacks. But something else you can do is actually use your bursts when you're about to get hit to dodge attacks. So Quickswap Teams are very good for this because they're basically spamming their bursts like all the time. They're literally just cycling between bursts, so they can basically never get hit as long as they're spamming their bursts. And just generally, like if you have your bursts up, you can basically use them as you're about to get hit to avoid the damage. Like yes, you could dash away, but if you want to save stamina or you're afraid of getting hit, or you want to use your burst but you don't want to get hit right after, like right after you use your burst, you can sort of wait a little, and as you're about to get hit, you press your burst, go invulnerable, and then you're good to go. Now keep in mind, not every burst has invulnerability. Some have more than the others. For example, Fischl's burst doesn't make you invulnerable during it, so it is something you do have to test out character by character, but generally speaking, it can be good to use your burst at an opportune moment if you are about to get hit and want to avoid damage. And so in this video, I tried to include many different ways to improve your gameplay. It's like a lot of different tips in one video that I really didn't want to make separate videos on because it's a lot of like very important information, but none of them are like big enough to make a whole video on. So I tried to clump everything up in this one concise guide. And if you found this video, I hope it was helpful. I tried to make this as helpful as possible, and I still don't know what I'm going to title it. I don't know how to describe this video, but it is basically advanced gameplay tips that I wanted to share with you guys. Hopefully this helps you guys 9-star Abyss if you haven't already, or just elevate your gameplay. I've noticed a lot of people with really good artifacts or teams still struggle to like clear content because they're missing a lot of like the rotations or running too much energy recharge and things like that can definitely hinder them, and that hopefully I cleared up in this video. Anyways, I don't want to ramble on for too long. My next video might be a bit controversial to say the least, so stay tuned for that, I guess. But anyways, that's about it for me. I hope this video was helpful. I'm super hyped for Kazuha. Subscribe if you want to. If you don't, that's okay too, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.